Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and may the peace and blessings of the Almighty be with you all. One of the most common questions in comparative theology is why the Qur'an, while affirming the God of Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, never uses the divine name Yod Heh Vav Heh, pronounced as Yahweh by some or Jehovah by others, found throughout the Hebrew Bible. In this video, God willing, we are thus going to be covering this contention raised by some adherents of the Bible. At first glance, this may appear to be a theological divergence, but a closer examination of the nature of the name itself, its biblical function, and its intended meaning reveals something far more nuanced. Rather than being a personal name in the modern sense, the name functions as a theological designation, one meant to point beyond pronunciation, beyond specificity, and toward a conception of God as an eternal, self-existent being. Understanding this helps clarify not only the Qur'an's choice of language, but also its continuity with earlier monotheistic revelation. The divine name, Yod Heh Vav Heh, often called the Tetragrammaton, meaning 4 letters, first appears explicitly in Genesis chapter 2, verse 4, where the biblical text transitions from the more general term Elohim to YaHWeH Elohim. However, the name is not explained there. Its theological meaning is instead revealed later in one of the most pivotal moments in biblical history, Moses' encounter with God at the burning bush in Exodus chapter 3. When Moses asks God what name he should give to the Israelites, God responds with the enigmatic phrase, Ehyeh asher ehyeh, commonly translated as, I am who I am, or I will be what I will be. Immediately afterward, God says, This is my name forever. What is striking here is that God does not offer a conventional name, but a statement of being. The divine response resists limitation, definition, and categorization. It is not a name in the sense of identification, but a declaration of existence itself. It is here that a crucial theological clarification must be made. The Tetragrammaton was never intended to function as a spoken personal name, nor was it meant to be vocalized in everyday speech. Rather, it served as a designation, a compressed symbolic representation of God's eternal nature as the one who is, the one who was, and the one who will ever be. The Israelites, in an effort to preserve and simplify this profound metaphysical truth, designated the 4 consonants Yod Heh Vav Heh to capture the idea of divine being across time. The name points not to who God is in a personal sense, but to that God is, independent, uncaused, eternal, and sustaining all existence. This understanding is reinforced by Israelite practice itself. The Tetragrammaton was not read aloud. When encountered in Scripture, it was consistently substituted with Adonai, meaning Lord. This was not because the pronunciation had been forgotten, but because it was never meant to be pronounced. The idea that the true pronunciation of the Tetragrammaton has been lost to history assumes that it was once intended for vocal use. The biblical and liturgical evidence suggests otherwise. The avoidance of pronunciation was intentional, rooted in reverence and theological restraint. Archaeological findings support the historical usage of the Tetragrammaton as a written designation rather than a spoken name. Inscriptions such as the Mesha Stela, the Kuntilat Adrud texts, and the Elephantine papyri demonstrate that the Tetragrammaton was widely recognized as the God of Israel. Yet none of these sources clarify pronunciation, nor do they treat the name as a phonetic label. Instead, they reinforce its function as a sacred identifier embedded within covenantal and theological frameworks. Even outside of Judah, Jewish communities treated the name with the same restraint. This consistency suggests a shared understanding. The Tetragrammaton was not a name to be uttered casually, but a symbolic pointer to divine reality itself. Returning to the burning bush, God's response to Moses reveals the heart of the matter. I am is not merely a statement of existence. It is a declaration of absolute being, existence that is not dependent on time, creation, or human comprehension. God does not say, I am called, but simply, I am. The Tetragrammaton, then, functions as a theological shorthand for this revelation. It encapsulates timelessness, self-subsistence, and constancy. God is not one being among others, nor a deity defined by genealogy or locality. God is being itself. This understanding aligns closely with later philosophical theology, but its roots are already present in the biblical text. The Israelites did not name God in order to define him. They designated him in order to avoid doing so. Another key distinction lies in how God is framed within the respective scriptures. For much of the Hebrew Bible, God is spoken of primarily as the God of Israel, a covenantal deity acting within a particular people, land, and history. While universal sovereignty is certainly present in the biblical text, it is often implicit rather than foregrounded. The Qur'an, by contrast, consistently presents God as Rabb al-Alamin, the Lord of all worlds, the heavens and the earth and everything between them. God is not introduced as belonging to a specific people before being universal. He is universal from the outset. This framing naturally resists the adoption of a designation rooted in a particular ethnic or covenantal context. With this framework in mind, the Qur'an's absence of the Tetragrammaton becomes not a rejection, but a continuation of this theological impulse. The Qur'an is revealed in Arabic and addresses humanity as a whole, not a single covenantal community. It uses the term Allah, meaning the God, which, like the Tetragrammaton, is not a personal name, but a designation pointing to ultimate reality. The Quranic conception of God emphasizes Tawheed, absolute oneness, and Tanzih, divine transcendence. God is described through attributes, the ever-living, the self-subsisting, the first and the last, not through a restricted personal identifier. This mirrors the intent behind the Tetragrammaton, to refer to God without confining him. In fact, the Quranic description of God as the first and the last, the ever-living, the self-subsisting, the seen and the unseen, echoes the very meaning encapsulated in the Tetragrammaton, as the one who is, was, and will be. Significantly, the Qur'an does not erase the historical reality of the Tetragrammaton. On the contrary, it preserves the legacy of the divine designation indirectly through the names of biblical figures who bore it as an epithet. Names such as Elijah, i.e. Ilyas, meaning my God is Yahweh, and Zechariah, i.e. Zachariah, meaning Yahweh has remembered, appear in the Qur'an, demonstrating clear recognition that the designation was historically operative within earlier prophetic communities. However, while the Qur'an acknowledges the usage of the designation within personal names, it never elevates the Tetragrammaton to the status of a personal name for God himself. This distinction is crucial. The Qur'an recognizes the theological history without adopting its symbolic shorthand, choosing instead to articulate divine reality in a universal linguistic framework. In the end, the question is not why the Qur'an does not use the Tetragrammaton, but whether the Tetragrammaton was ever meant to function as a spoken name at all. When understood properly, the Tetragrammaton was never meant to function as a personal name to be spoken, preserved, or recovered. It was a theological gesture toward the ineffable, toward the one who is, was, and will ever be. The Qur'an, far from rejecting this concept, carries it forward by refusing to localize or personalize God through inherited nomenclature. By affirming God as universally sovereign, eternally existent, and beyond human categorization, the Qur'an echoes the very truth the Tetragrammaton was designed to convey. In this sense, the absence of the Tetragrammaton in the Qur'an is not a loss, but a reaffirmation of what the designation always meant. When understood as a designation arising from God's self-revelation at the burning bush, the Tetragrammaton becomes a theological bridge rather than a point of division. Both the Bible and the Qur'an resist reducing God to a name, instead pointing toward an eternal, self-existent reality beyond language. In this light, the Qur'an's use of Allah is not a departure from biblical monotheism, but a reaffirmation of its deepest insight, that God simply is.